I'm very honored to speak in Ibn Rushd lectures, to which previous professors and scholars of prestigious claim have talked. I think I can share the slides, right? In this presentation, I will be focusing on Islamic thought and Islamic intellectual history at large, and how we can detect the sources of pluralism in it. As I said, this is based on a recent work that is published, edited volume with the scholars of international claim in the field of Islamic studies. Well, to understand pluralism in a world religion like Islam, we need to, I think, provide a framework that makes things easier for us to understand as we proceed. Otherwise, if we focus only on the legal aspects of a particular faith tradition, we will miss the picture. And we'll miss the picture of getting the resources, the potential resources of pluralism and adaptation to various contexts and times. And this framework is the following, which I have applied in other published work. We can understand a world religion and its comprehensiveness if we take into account these three axes, or this framework: the world, or how it looks at the world in sense of the cosmos, the universe, not only Earth, and the way it looks at society and how it wishes to regulate it with norms that have to do with not only the individual and the family or the household, but the community at large and its relations with also other different believers or non-believers at the larger scale. And then the individual level, and here is the moral aspect of a faith tradition. And this happens, and this we should remember, this happens and in time, this happens in space, and this happens according to a particular perspective. And a faith tradition like Islam, for example, we need to understand how this perception of the world, society, individuals changes over time, changes over space, I mean, in different geographies, in the vast Islamic and non-Islamic majority contexts, and the perspective from which us as scholars or as observers look at these transformations, or as believers, believers or non-believers or scholars, depending on our how we look at it and from which perspective. Are we sociologists, anthropologists, or historians of ideas, policymakers? So all these are important factors that have to be taken into account in understanding what we want to understand or the issue being discussed. And this means that a faith tradition is always dynamic. That's why it claims it is it's historical but ahistorical. It's temporal. It works in time, but it's also atemporal. It is that's its claim and the claim of any faith tradition. So, which means that the ontological and the epistemological aspects of a tradition are constantly on the move, in flux, though an ordinary believer or ordinary believers may not be aware of that. But this is, from scholarly analytical perspective, is always worth keeping in mind. Now we go into the issue of pluralism. If this issue of pluralism started actually in the Christian tradition, because that's the first, or in modern times at least, with the rise of secularism and the different view of the world, more scientific, more rational, is started with the Christian tradition, and it has been in discussion for the last 150 years, but mostly after the Second World War and so-called Second Vatican Council, 1962 and 1965, where the church opened up to world traditions. World traditions that were not recognized started being recognized as paths for truth, and this is a major opening in the Christian Catholic Church, and so from the religious studies perspective and comparisons of religions, it's moved on to political philosophy. So what we are doing here is we'll be talking about theology and philosophy and how they intertwine, but we leave that for discussion. One of the major scholars that have started using and theorizing this from a Christian perspective is John Heck from 1984, and he makes a distinction between pre-modern times where exclusivism and inclusivism were the dominant frames in faith traditions, and the idea of pluralism is modern one, and it seeks to find the ultimate reality as the major final idea of all faith traditions, including most recent or modern, like Scientology religions. And at certain moments, in certain other interviews, he says that John Hick, says that also maybe you can consider communism in that. I mean, can we consider communism as a belief system? I bracket that. So if we look at Islam, according to this framework, you can say, well, it's even in pre-modern times, it was not exclusivist, as were, for example, other faith traditions. It was inclusive, because there were always doors to include, for example, the people of the book, and which was, I mean, Christianity, Abrahamic faiths, Judaism and Christianity, they were included within Muslim polity, and this was extended to also the Zoroastrians and Hindus, for example. So that was the case already in pre-modern time. But with modern times, the extension of the idea of pluralism to the same believers to within the Islamic framework has become a challenge. So there is a discussion over intra-faith pluralism first, and then interfaith pluralism. And that means not only religious, but also its repercussions in the public sphere, which means political pluralism. And that's a point I will be going into later on as I proceed. Well, this being borne in mind, I can, before I move on, I can also say that pluralism is a concept that comes in discussion along with other concepts like tolerance, multiculturalism. Well, scholars have differed in that, and they have overcome the concept of tolerance. They say it's it might look like now pejorative because it considers other faith traditions or the tolerated ideas or belief systems, be they religious or non-religious, as second-class belief systems. So that's why they are tolerated. But more philosophically, theoretically, that was not the mean, actually, and we can discuss that also or that's discussed within the fields of religious tolerance, religious pluralism, and the idea of multiculturalism, another concept that's even most recent. Well, and this said, how did the Islamic societies and polities, sovereign polities, manage pluralism? From how is pluralism talked about in the Islamic tradition, in the major sources, the Quran, the prophetic Sunnah, and then in the early Caliphate, and then in imperial times, in imperial and sultanic times. Theoretically, we can think of these four evidences of pluralism within the Islamic tradition, which were not always honored, and that's a historical fact as well. But in principle, and I will not be quoting exact quote because of time, there are clear Quranic verses that say, for example, that belief is based on freedom. There is freedom of belief and unbelief. Starting from the creation story and the satanic dialogue with God, which means that Satan was allowed to be different, and he was allowed also to live and then maybe tempt the human beings to believe or not believe. So that's already an ontological a moment of pluralism from the beginning. Then the other element in the Quran which supports the idea of pluralism is ontological equality of all human beings and genders, irrespective of their color and gender and faith. And what counts is, in the eyes of the Creator, is human deeds and not their faith. Faith should lead to good deeds in life, and it's not faith that secures man's salvation. That's also another element. And this is linked to the question of piety, which is intimate, but its repercussions are the ones that also count in society. While piety is intimate, it is how it manifests itself in society, in accommodating the other and living with the other, that matters. And then the other factor that supports the idea of pluralism in the Quran is that the Quran, from a political perspective, does not specify any political system, including the caliphate, which was later formation, a choice, a historical element in Islamic, so-called Islamic history. These Quranic principles, they are by rigid Orthodox interpreters, they can find other verses that contradict these or oppose these, or for some abrogate these, but these are canonical verses that support this idea of difference, including the idea that God created humanity different, human beings different as tribes, etc. And if he willed, he could have created them all equal and all the same. Then the prophetic middle is a manifestation of this Quranic ethos in his private life, in his teachings, and also when he created the polity in Medina, and so-called Charter of Medina. Sorry, with the Jews as part of the Ummah, as Ummah in that sense as polity, and not only spiritual path, spiritual community, but also political, which was extended afterwards to Christian tribes, and then extended even further by the later caliphs to other faith traditions. I also can mention here the idea of no successor that was appointed by the Prophet, at least from Sunni tradition, though the Shia tradition has a different story about it, but which means that there is also at the political level a high level of giving space to new voices or different voices, or those who are capable to rule the community. That's also an important element to take as a source of pluralism. And then the guided caliphs, or the first four guided caliphs, lived or tried to replicate the prophetic model with their also input. And it is here in the early caliphate period that schism started to take place, and emerged after conflict, serious conflict about who should govern, etc. Emerged theological debates, and these theological debates were also intra Muslim or Islamic, and later on they were inter-faith based, and they were important in so-called especially early formative period of Islam, and created later on theological schools that would discuss free will, whether human beings are free, can choose, or they are there is idea of predestination, etc. And then there is historical evidence of the source of pluralism. Besides the idea of what I said, the formation of, through political schism, there is intellectual schism as well. And it flourished later on. It became profound philosophical schools, especially after opening to the Indian, Persian, and later on philosophically and scientifically also to the Greek, especially the Greek tradition. So there was a flourishing period of discussing these ideas in different theological, philosophical spheres, and also in literary and poetic texts. The idea of dhimmi status, which of course, if looked at from a current modern perspective, it's second-class citizens. It considers the people of the book as second-class citizens. But at the time, in its time, it was an advanced system, because no faith tradition at the time gave clearly in its sacred text, like as does the Quran, space for other believers to maintain their belief system. So in that time, it was revolutionary. And that's why you find Christians and Jews of different denominations within these also faith traditions who worked within the caliphal palaces, within in caliphal high culture period, in the House of Wisdom, for example. The early translators, the first translators of major texts from Syriac or Greek into or Persian into Arabic were often new Muslims, and a lot of them in the beginning were or remained Christians, for example. And the same thing in later contexts, like in so-called Al-Andalus or Muslim Spain, or in Sicily, the Christians and Jews were an important intellectual and political. I mean, there was an elite of these minorities that were influential, and there are clear evidences of that in scholarship. So these are the major. This doesn't mean that there were no moments of conflict, depending on who rules, depending on socio-political and situation of a particular caliph or particular sultanate, etc. Those moments do exist in history. So if I want to summarize, there is the Quran, the juridical aspect in the Quran, however pluralist it is, anyway, it's not a juridical text. It's minimally so. It's about 15% of it is juridical. And in the formative period, the idea of the caliphate was very plural, as were other empires of the time. If you think of the Roman Empire, it was also, and that's characteristic of empires. The difference here is that some empires depended on the emperor to have a will, an interest to be accommodative of other faith traditions. But in the Islamic tradition, besides that caliphal or personal attitude towards pluralism and being open to other communities and accommodating them, there was also these Quranic teaching of being of maintaining at least this belief, freedom of belief, especially for the people of the book. That leaves us still broadly with also the idea that there is no single book of Sharia that is followed everywhere. That the idea that Sharia was pluralist played on the side of this plurality. So the fact that there were different schools in Sharia and there was no one single book and no one single authority, neither spiritual nor political, played an important role towards the adoption of this cosmopolitan spirit of Islamic political context or polities. But this becomes, as we'll see in a while, becomes a problem in modern times, because in the absence of clear, unified Sharia maybe prescriptions, or one unified spiritual authority, or one unified political authority, becomes a problem and leaves space for either rigid or radical violent interpretations, as has historically shown us in most recent times. So this plurality, as I said, implied different interpretations at the level of jurisprudence. The Quranic interpretations were different, legal theories different, and this gave space to internal diversity, which flourished. And this was accompanied by also economic prosperity, etc. Pluralism also flourishes when there is kind of ease at the economic level, and it deteriorates when the economic prospects deteriorate. And you can see that even if you want to compare quickly with modern discussions, when there is unemployment rise in particular modern secular liberal society, even now in Western Europe, the aspect of tolerance towards, like, say, new immigrants or refugees becomes less. So that has to do also, like, socio-economic balances are threatened or challenged, and that threatens the idea of openness towards the other. I think I will also skip, but though it's an important aspect, the idea of pluralism in the Islamic tradition and how reason and revelation have played a role in it. This requires a lot of time, but at least there are some 4 to 5 major interpretations of how diversity is supported or not supported, according to some, by the tradition. The Quran and the prophetic tradition. And here, the idea of pluralism for some is mostly, in modern times, has to be supported if one adopts the rationalist attitude or pure rational attitude of so-called Mu'tazila school, which supported never denied revelation, but always defended the human reason as able to define what is right and what is wrong, and what is bad and what is good. Though in the 830s to 800 mid-40s, so that's the 9th century, it was adopted as state or caliphal policy by Caliph al-Ma'mun, and he tried to enforce it on the other schools, and here I refer to the question of the mihna, or it was inquisition-like for 14-15 years, where the idea of the Quran as created text and not eternal text was discussed and tried to be enforced. And this school defends the idea of reason as human reason is able to give us answers to human beings, to guide human beings, and revelation is only supplementary. It supports this what rational. Then the idea, its reverse is the more rigid attitude that revelation gives us all the answers, and that's it. And then the more the reconciliatory and what has become dominant school is the Ash'ari school, which is in the middle, reconciliatory. It says that revelation and reason are complementary. And that's how Muslim societies have ever since lived the tradition. So, and these issues are mostly debated. Then there is the Shia tradition, which gives the imam, the infallible imam, not the mosque imam, but the religious guide. The infallible imam is the one who is able to explain revelation, depending whether it's 12th or 7th Shia or Zaydis, etc. But that's one version of it. And then the Maturidi's are very close to the Sunnis in this. And the Muslim philosophers were close to the idea, of course, to the Mu'tazila, or that reason is prior, or at least is supported by revelation. They are not contradictory. And one of the great figures that championed this is Ibn Rushd, who managed to not see antagonism between religion or here he refers to it as al-sharia or al-hikmah or philosophy. And in modern times, Muhammad Abid al-Jabri, who is called, well, the most prominent neo-Averroist, and he saw in Averroes the major figure that Muslim majority societies, and especially the Arab world, has to look at to adapt to modern challenges. This way, there is no contradiction, neither in the public sphere nor in intellectual sphere, over what should guide human life. Is it reason or revelation, or both of them can do, because they are not contradictory. They lead to the same truth. They are two independent disciplines. And that's one of the reasons why, between brackets, I also worked on Al-Jabri and edited the first volume in English some 4 years ago. Modernity and the challenge of pluralism. And since I am speaking in this platform, I can also say that Al-Jabri, yes, I know, he received the Freedom of Thought Prize from this important platform. And I do assume it's for this reason that this platform is called Ibn Rushd, for this great openness in medieval times, which influenced scholastic debates in the Christian tradition and the Jewish tradition in early medieval times, from 12th centuries onwards. Now, this intellectual baggage does not seem enough in modern times. And what I have tried to say so far concerns pre-modern times. And then by the modern times, I refer to the last 200 years during so-called Nahda, Arab Nahda, or Renaissance, then the second wave of it from the 1960s or so-called 1967 generation. And now with the Arab Spring, scholars have started to speak of a new generation of thinking or rethinking the tradition, because human aspirations or Muslims in Muslim majority, human aspirations in Muslim majority societies have increased. And the challenge is that the Sharia paradigm in the past, if it worked, it does face serious challenges now, because the modern challenges are multiple at the socio-economic, cultural level. And Sharia doesn't seem to have to offer, Sharia's paradigm, collective and not only law, doesn't seem to offer for some clear answers, because Muslim majority societies refer often only to religion as an answer, and these answers are not there, so they have to be developed from these sources. And when they are developed, they are challenged, and they are considered not faithful to the tradition. But the reformists, the critical scholars, etc., say no. Since we do have the bases that support human reason in the tradition, that means that Sharia can only be understood and only be relived if human reason is reactivated by being open to modern challenges. That's why some scholars like Ibn Rushd and Al-Jabri and the like become prominent figures. That's why there has been a need to redefine what is Islam, what is Islamic, what is Islamist, because Sharia no longer give clear answers to societies. I think I don't have time to say how Islam, the question of what is Islam emerged. It started with the encounter with Europe, modern Europe, during the colonial period. Then there was a cultural revival and quest to revitalize the tradition. Then the political revival started when colonialism took place and gave bad picture of what modernity is or what modern Europe is about. So that was the dark side of modernity and how it was interpreted. So the rise of the Islamic and not Islam, I think, started to take different interpretations. And then a more radical interpretation of what is Islamic started to emerge from the late 1960s and 70s because of the failure of nationalist, so-called secular movements or revivalist movements. And then the Islamist became the answer. And many speakers define this, what is Islamist, what is Islam and what is Islamic. From ordinary believers, from ultra-Orthodox believers, to light believers, to the Sufis, to the jurists, the philosophers, the theologians, and to state Muslim majority societies or state Islam. And then classical religious institutions do define what is Islam, Islamic movements, the conservative but non-violent, then also the violent branches or independent branches that are violent also do contribute to defining what is Islam. And the terrorists do their job and say, no, we do know what is Islam. Then there are also the non-Muslim experts of Islam, and including, but not only, the Islamophobes. They say, no, we know what Islam is. It is incompatible with anything that is modern and scientific and European and Western, etc. So what is Islamic is not to be Islamic at all. So to be ex-Muslim or is the way for Muslims to go ahead. So these are issues. So in the sense that there are so many stakeholders who intervene in defining what is Islamic, that's why we need to, again, to clarify the picture if we want to define and find out who defines the pluralism and who plays a role in it and for it or against it. Well, this slide summarizes what I have said. So that there is popular ordinary Islam, lived Islam, which has different manifestations among Muslims all over the world. It's not the same worldview, but its applications according to culture and society differ. Then intellectual Islam, I mean by it the philosophical and the theological, which is plural inside. Mystical Islam is also part of it. Political Islam and its varieties, and then state Islam. There are as many Islams at the state level as there are so-called Muslim majority societies, more or less. Then there is Orientalists or other Islam, and Orientalist, of course, is another debate. And at certain moments, as a scholarship, it played a negative role, but it has metamorphosed, and there is always the biased classical Orientalism, I think, its time is over. Studies of Islamic Muslim majority societies has taken a more objective tone for good time now. But the negative Orientalism or biased Orientalism of the late 18th and good parts of 19th century is still there and nurtures fears of Islam and Muslims, especially in non-Muslim majority societies or in the West. The major challenges then, if I want to summarize it, they are, again, intellectual and political. And the political is manifestation of the intellectual, though not always. They are independent spheres. There are clear, important intellectual projects that defend the idea of pluralism. And I just refer to Muhammad Abd al-Jabri and the list of scholars that have tried to theorize modern Arab or Islamic societies that are plural, either liberal or secular, or sometimes called only democratic, to avoid the concepts that are provocative, are plenty. So they try to overcome the idea of classical, they redefine what the caliphate is and how it worked, and that it was not ideal, that it had its shortcomings, and that the Quran is not constitution, is moral guide, to avoid the conflation of the terms, and that past Sharia diversity cannot be made equal to so-called now rigid Sharia in post-colonial modern nation states of Muslims, either in Morocco, Indonesia, and Saudi Arabia, or Iran. The way Sharia is now conceived is totally different from the way it was in pre-modern times. In pre-modern times, it was much more dynamic, plural. Of course, it was not liberal. Of course, it was not secular, but it worked and it functioned, and that's why societies survived for centuries, and it governed societies apparently well, or at least good enough. But the way it has metamorphosed in modern times is deformative. It has been deformed. It's hybrid with so-called modern man-made positive laws, and only the dark side, more or less, or the non-egalitarian aspects that have remained, and they are, a lot of them are patriarchal, because especially in the human rights concerning women, etc. Though on other aspects, on minority rights, for example, there are no issues about that now. Everyone is equal before the law, but still there are certain aspects on the private level, on the custody of children, equality in household management, that remain rigid, Sharia based. And there are the picture there is not homogeneous. Each nation state in so-called Muslim world has taken different steps and is managing its affairs differently, though they share a lot, but there are certain successful stories, sometimes less successful stories, and the challenges remain. And then these intellectual challenges are again manifest in the public sphere, in the political sphere. And that is why we still refer to the names Islamic world, Muslim majority societies. But actually, we have to overcome these concepts, because they are first part of the Orientalist tradition, which the West in its colonial period like to have, because to think of the Islamic world as a homogeneous world, but it is not. And then now there are nation states that are totally independent in sense of from each other. I mean, there is no caliphate, there is no one spiritual or really religious authority or political authority that unites the Muslim world. I think it is a concept that has to be overcome to avoid these conceptual clarities, and to refer to geographies the way we refer to Europe or the West as political geographies. And then we have to distinguish between political Islam and politics in Islam. While Sharia, like any other faith tradition, tries, tries to keep the moral teachings active or alive in the public sphere, that does not make them political. I think that's a debate that is important, that is taking place, that has been taking place for the last century or so, but especially from the 1960s or so-called 1967 intellectual generation, to which Al-Jabri, Abdullah Al-Arabi, or Arkoun, or Nasr, or also other trends within this, like Abdul Rahman perspective is important there. So they focalize morality, they focalize moral teachings that could be brought to the public sphere, but does not make of them political. So there is the difference there that should be underlined. And this is one of the examples that I would have loved to focus on, but I have referred to them in different works. And as you could see, Al-Jabri is there and present in my framework. Concluding notes. Allow me to read so that my point could be very clear. Theological. The first point is theological as well as historical evidences speak of important potential for further pluralization, what they refer to as pluralization in Islamic thought and modern politics. And some scholars here speak of thick and thin Sharia. I mean, Sharia, if it was thick and it dominated every aspect in pre-modern times, now it can be thin, and we can refer to more moral aspects, aesthetic aspects, and some others speak of negative and positive pluralism. Like Surush, borrowing certain concepts or other philosophical traditions. The second point is that religious pluralism is not enough in society. I do think that it is political pluralism that matters most, which the modern state monopolizes, because the modern state in so-called Arab societies or Muslim majority societies monopolizes the religious discourse. That's why Asif Bayat's concept of secular religious states is very pertinent. I think it's the challenge is at the political level, though the religious level or sphere is important and has to make or has to work on itself to overcome some serious confusions of concepts. Then third point is that religious conservatism marks all societies, including the most secular liberal societies. I mean, there is conservatism in religion in all societies, including liberal societies. But as long as it is the political is kind of neutral in the sense of secular, at least that conservatism can be channeled through its own channels, independent from the mainstream or the shared political. But the public sphere can include conservative ideas. Islam is, and that's a fundamental point in my argument, is that Islam is theocentrist. It invokes the divine in human daily life and action, but it is not theocratic by default. It is not theocratic by default. Theocentrism is its utmost manifestation of monotheism. So if God is invoked in the public culture of Muslim majority societies, is in the daily life of Muslims, that does not make of Islam, that does not make of it a theocratic faith tradition. That manifestation is only a reflection of the idea that of Tawheed, which is the pillar of being Muslim. So, and that's what I underline here as theocentric and not theocratic. So, society could remain spiritual, religious, but at the political level, that should be resolved and through a neutral apparatuses, democratic apparatuses. And with that, I stop and I thank you very much. And I'm open to the